All right. Thank you so much, Brett. Appreciate that. That was excellent information. And what I'd like to do is now move into a Q&A. For those of you that are on the line, you can use the chat window on the right-hand side. You can go ahead and ask your questions there. We already have a few questions that have been accumulating during the webinar, so we'll start with those. We have a question from Sue in Washington State, and she is asking what email domain is best to use if she doesn't have her own website or domain name that is like she just has like a DBA. She doesn't have a company set up. So what's the best? Is it Gmail? Is it AOL? What would you suggest?
Well, to be honest with you, the best answer that I can give you is get a domain. At least in my own experience, I have folks all the time trying to sell me email appending services, list brokering, etc. And frankly, when they originate from Gmail, Ymail, AOL, I tend to ignore them. These days, most of the major internet service providers out there can hook you up with a website for less than $20 a month, and usually it includes what they call a pop account, which is basically a point of presence email that you can use where emails will originate from and reply back into your domain. That's really going to be the best way for you to go, and it'll definitely be one of the most prudent investments you make in your consultancy.
Okay. And I've got a question here from David in Maryland. He wants to know what are your thoughts on using email campaigns like Constant Contact or like marketing automation strategies with your contacts, and how do you decide when to start automating your communications to your Rolodex?
Sure, and that's a great question. Marketing automation is tremendous. Marketing automation, though, for most organizations is implied when you're doing a significant amount of it. If you're in professional services and you're an independent consultancy or one or two person shops, perhaps, it's my very strong belief that personalized direct communication is the best way to go. Now, Constant Contact is great in the sense that it only allows overt opt-in lists to be leveraged on it. It provides you some means to automate unsubscriptions and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, unless you have a large enough number of contacts that you need to deliver by that means, and then with respect to automation, the other value proposition there, of course, is leading folks through a buying cycle, right? So if you need to manage a process of nurturing them by different channels, that's a great way to go. And I'll plug a company called Act-On Software right now. Very, very affordable. Bolts onto Salesforce.com, and it's a great way to manage that sort of information.
Perfect. I've got a question here from Kimberly, and she wants to know, she's had some contacts with clients that she's made in the past, and let's say 6 months or a year has passed. She reached out to them, but they never got back to her. What would you suggest that message be if a long period has passed? 6 months, a year, trying to reconnect. What would you suggest the message be and the medium for the message?
Sure. Well, first let me tell you that recency and frequency are very important, whether you're doing big blasts through Constant Contact or whether you're communicating one-on-one. As you saw in our presentation, we talked about every 3 business days as being a good rhythm for that. In terms of how often, we generally prefer, after we've been through a number of touch points as we described today, to not return to that particular contact for 90 days. So you're talking about 6 months and longer. My guesstimate is that they probably don't recall who you are in the first place unless you personally were acquainted with them or know them through some trade organization. So my suggestion would be take a look at the approach that we just covered today and go in there with a fresh set of eyes to communicate with these folks, and it'll rather quickly tell you whether or not utilizing this new tactic is the most effective way to get in there.
Okay. And another question here about social media. So, you know, when is it appropriate to connect with someone on, let's say, LinkedIn? Would it be you connect with them on LinkedIn and then send them an email? Do you send them an email introducing yourself with the strategy that you discussed, and then you connect with them after? Do you wait for them to say, oh, it's okay for you to connect with me on LinkedIn and get that approval before you send the message, or do you send the message within the LinkedIn? And then how do you use social media to help keep in contact with everybody aside from the strategy that you've discussed?
Wow, that was a question and a half, and a perfect example of why that's a webinar unto itself. But those are all great queries. The most important thing I would say about LinkedIn is be a member. And to be a member, you've got to set up a profile. And that profile is basically how you're projecting yourself to the network. It's how you'll be found for folks looking for like-minded people on the network. And it'll also be how you get SEO'd. That is, LinkedIn, just like Mint and the others, will take your public profile and they will put it on the major search engines because it's another backlink, if you will, to communicate or to raise the relevance of their network and make it overall more findable. So first, set up a profile, put some meaningful stuff in that. The next thing is, once you're a member and you have a profile, look for things like discussion groups and events that are relevant to you, and obviously would be relevant to folks that are either those you wish to contact with or those you need to work with. Once you've done that, that's when you begin to communicate internally with LinkedIn. Now, why is that? Well, because when you reach out to someone on LinkedIn that you don't know, you have to have what they call a point of affinity. And those point of affinities are basically, there's four kinds. One is that you're a member of a discussion group. Two, that you've done business together before. And what it'll do is it'll look for relevance or linkage between your profiles. That's another reason why your profile needs to be complete as possible. That's the most effective way to grow your network in a meaningful fashion. Now, I mentioned during the presentation that there's also something called in-mails. Now, in-mails, unfortunately, are only available to folks who are at a paid subscription level, which, as I said, begins at 50 and goes up. At 50, you can get most of what you need. An in-mail allows you to communicate with people who are outside of your network without having a necessary point of affinity, but you have to respect what their in-mail rules are. So an example might be that they're willing to accept information about business deals or consulting offerings. Great. So you can communicate by in-mail with them. If it's deemed appropriate by the recipient, then you actually get additional in-mails added to your quiver, if you will. So it can be a great way to project yourself to those you aren't connected with and give yourself more ability to communicate with others. Once you are connected with people on LinkedIn, generally speaking, your email address is available or visible to them, and theirs is the same with you. LinkedIn tends to frown upon communication that references LinkedIn when it's outside the network. But the fact that they have connected with you does in fact mean that they've opted into communication with you. So my counsel is, at the point that your network is large enough that there are enough email addresses to download and to leverage, you should feel comfortable doing so in an appropriate fashion, but you definitely would not want to reference the fact that you're connected on LinkedIn. I know that was a lot, but I hope it was helpful.
No, that was great. We actually do have quite a few questions that are listed here. We're not going to have time to get to those, but after the webinar, we'll be sure to discuss these with Bret, and we'll email you your answers. Just moving on, if you want to learn more, you can always email MBO Partners at info@mbopartners.com. We have a phenomenal website with lots of really cool widgets about independent consulting, and we've got a phenomenal resources section with books and articles and actually an archive of webinars, so feel free to check that out. You can follow us on Twitter, and if you'd like to sign up for additional information, you can email those addresses below. We also have another webinar that's going to be coming up really soon. It's on September 18th at 1 p.m., and that's going to be with Tom Sant, who's an author of quite a few books in the independent consulting space. So check that out. And I think that's going to be it. Bret, if you have anything else to add, but I just want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time here. It's about 1:45 or so.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I just want to thank MBO for the opportunity to communicate with some of my fellow consultants and independent contractors. And as Steve mentioned, if you've got additional questions, I'd be more than happy to address them for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for attending the webinar today. I hope you enjoyed the information. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out the copy of the slides and also a link to the webinar within, I'd say, 48 hours or so. All right. Take care, everybody.